Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT psychotherapy. The George Brassey podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall, Chicago Heights, Illinois. Snow was on everybody's mind at Wednesday night's Chicago Heights City Council meeting. The Chicago area was hit by a major snowstorm, and Chicago Heights had about 10 inches of snow dumped on it Tuesday and Wednesday. City Hall was closed Wednesday afternoon because of the winter storm, and garbage pickup on Wednesday and Thursday was also postponed. And students at Chicago Heights School District 163 went to remote learning Wednesday because of the storm. The mayor's chief of staff, Karen Zaranti, thanked city workers for their efforts. She told the council that city workers had been working round the clock to keep city streets open and safe, and would continue to do so throughout the duration of the storm. Fifth Ward Alderman George Brassey also lauded city workers, saying, "The snowstorm we have experienced in recent days has been terrible, but the City of Chicago Heights Public Works Department has done an excellent job in maintaining the roads during the snowstorm. Each and every resident's request that was submitted to my office was addressed in a quick and efficient fashion." Christopher Bykoskas, 4th Ward Alderman, added that Public Works is working diligently, doing a great job cleaning up the streets. In other business, Zaranti said that the city would be hosting its second Illinois Department of Public Health clinic offering vaccinations and booster shots 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday, February 12 at City Hall. The council also approved an ordinance renewing the city's employee health insurance policy and premium. The city expects to see premiums remain roughly the same. The city's benefits and insurance consultant told the council that he was able to negotiate lower rates with its insurer, Blue Cross/Blue Shield PPO, despite higher prescription drug usage by the 231 employees covered under the policy. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 815-740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey podcast. I'm so glad to welcome to the George Brassey podcast our next guest, Michael Volpe. Michael Volpe is a freelance investigative journalist and the author of several books, and the one we'll be talking about today is Prosecutors Gone Wild, which is the story of former Chicago Heights Mayor Chuck Panici. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, before we get into the book, we usually like to talk a little bit about the origins of our guest. Talk about who Michael Volpe is and how he became an investigative journalist.
Sure. I was born in what was then called the Soviet Union, but I came here when I was pretty young. So a little bit before I was 7 years old. So I've been a citizen for a long time. And, I speak perfect English, obviously, but I was in finance. However, I was actually in real estate in 2008, which was not good. And just by chance, I was blogging on something called Red State. And I met a guy named Kevin Koritsky, who was a whistleblower at Emory University, which is a really big deal university down in Atlanta. They call it the Ivy League of the South. And he had blown the whistle on what the medical school was doing at Grady Hospital, which is one of the biggest hospitals in the world, and a hospital that treats mostly poor people. And they're basically, the medical school, which was running the hospital, was taking advantage of the situation because all the patients were poor. And, it's a long, complex story, but I wrote a lot about it. But that was sort of like my entree. And real estate really wasn't making enough money. I was able to get some unemployment for a while, and then that's sort of how I got into it.
What part of this former Soviet Union were you born in?
Moscow. Yeah, though actually most of my family now is here. My aunt on my mom's side still lives there, though interestingly, she has 2 kids. One of them lives in Germany and the other one lives in Indiana. So, but I was born in Moscow. My dad's family is from like an area of Siberia. However, Siberia is big, so not like where they have the prisons, like a relatively nicer area, but like as rural as it's going to get. So my dad's story is sort of interesting because he comes from this like very small town, marries a woman from Moscow, and then winds up living his life at least part of his life in the U.S. But I was born in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. What was it like for you to transition from living in Moscow to America?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I'm going to do like a therapy session, but it actually aggravated a lot of my insecurities and my like nervous tension because the kids made fun of me for a variety of reasons, including the fact that I was from Russia, which was like a real problem for me at the time. It's very hard to process when kids are making fun of you because you're from Russia, because you are. Like, what's the response I'm supposed to, I'm like, oh my God, I'm screwed. If I'm from Russia and the kids make fun of you because you're from Russia, then I got a real problem for, till I'm through high school. But initially it aggravated it, and it was difficult to make friends early on. And I really never came out of my shell until I was in college. But yeah, look, like on like a little kid level, it was an adjustment.
Where did you go to college, Michael?
University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
So does the family move from Russia to Illinois?
Yeah, no, we did. We started out like in Chicago on the like pretty far north side. And within 2 years, my parents bought a house in Skokie. Eventually we moved to Northbrook, and that's all the North Shore. And you're like at different levels of wealthy, basically at that point. By the time my parents had gotten to Northbrook, let's just say my dad had come a long way from the little village in Siberia to one of the wealthiest suburbs of Chicago.
And speaking of the suburbs of Chicago, a lot of people listening to this are from Chicago Heights. I'm on the city council of Chicago Heights. What led to you writing the book Prosecutors Gone Wild?
So really early on, I did a story about the Chicago Republican Party, which is almost non-existent, but they did have like a scandalous story. I can't even remember. One of the people who I interviewed for the story was a friend of Chuck's. And he said, I got a good friend, Chuck Panici. He's, you seem, I don't know, I guess he was basically giving me a referral. And at the time, I was like, if somebody's willing to talk to me, that'd be great. But so I didn't know anything about Chuck at the time. And I didn't know exactly how to embark on it. But I met with him. He was a really difficult person to get along with, but a lot of that was my inexperience as well. But he has like, it's not A+ personality. It's like A 12+ personality. He has to be in charge, and it's really difficult when he's not in charge because he's always in charge.
So you get introduced to the former mayor, Chuck Panici. He's out of office. He's out of prison by this time when you meet him, or is he still in?
No, I met him when he was 79. So I think 2011 or 2012, or maybe even earlier than that. I met him when he was 79, whatever that comes to. But no, he had done his time. The first meeting, busts out that check from, I think, Reno Guidotti. Like, that was the key to everything for him. And so this check that ties like associates of the mafia, of the outfit, of Taco. This guy, Reno Guidotti, was like an associate of Taco. He's on the check. LeBou, it's cashed at LeBou's cash checking place. And the check is clearly like a part of a bribe for work that's not done effectively. And so, but now I can understand all of that. So he's showing me this check, and I'm so lost. I'm like, well, what the hell's going on? And it was so funny. He calls me later that day, and he goes, how come you didn't ask more questions? And he was like, basically like, how come you didn't get it? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's because you put me into a movie midway through, and I couldn't see the beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. But we started with the check. His case is so complex. There's 13 crimes, 13 bribes, and each one has its own set of facts. So in order to understand what happened, you have to understand each crime and then be able to link all the crimes together.
Talk a little bit about Mayor Panici's rise to the position of prominence.
In reality, this is like a great American success story. So his parents are working class. They owned, what was it, 3-Star. And it was a pretty successful bar. But he told me, he goes, when I left school, they had to burn the school down. He wasn't a good student, but he was very resourceful. And he immediately got into several things right away, which was brainstorming, goal setting, and then proper attitude. And then, so he would just obsessively learn about brainstorming, goal setting, proper attitude, and he'd apply it to every single thing he did. And that's why he was a successful businessman. That's why he started small fry basketball. That's why he was a wildly successful, what I call retail politician, because he would set goals. Like, here's one of the greatest anecdotes from Chuck. He looks at me one day and goes, so one of the keys to goals is you have to have a deadline. So like, you can't say I'm going to lose 10 pounds. You got to say, well, when are you going to lose it by? Like if you just say you're going to lose 10 pounds, that will never happen. So you got to have a deadline. So he looks at me and he goes, you know when I learned about deadlines? I was like, no, Chuck, when did you learn about deadlines? He goes, elections. You want to know when it doesn't matter how many votes you're going to get? The day after an election. You want to learn about deadlines, go run for office. So he applied that to everything. That's why he had a successful cleaning business. That's why he had a successful, when he was mayor, he had a successful business. They would like take on medical debt and they would try to like pay it off. But his job was to like make the connections with all the hospitals, but he's making like several $100,000 per year, legitimately, honest taxes. And that's why part of like what they accuse him of is ridiculous. Why would somebody who can make $300,000 yearly take bribes? They're already rich. And some of these bribes are like $4,000. You're saying he's going to risk everything to get a couple thousand on some like liquor license. That's what they call it. That was one of them. But he rose to success doing like basic things that anybody could do. Goal setting, proper attitude, brainstorming. Brainstorms every morning. He really would call me all the time to brainstorm. He just brainstorming all the time. And the goal setting. He's goal setting all the time as well.
A lot of people still to this day in the city revere the former. He is still in town, has an excellent reputation.
Right. You know what he told me? He said 15% of the people in Chicago Heights, I could cure cancer, they'd still hate me. 15% of the people, I could be on videotape molesting someone and they still love me. And then everyone else in the middle, they can be persuaded. But yeah, no, definitely. Look, he, by all measures, besides what happened in the trial, he was a success, not only a successful mayor, but successful for the town. The town flourished in every single way. All right, business was booming, crime was down. He showed me like they did surveys of when he left office of all the things that the mayor's office does, from crime to education to this, that, and there's like 80% approve in every single category. So He was wildly successful, but look, every politician, number one, has haters. Number two, obviously, some people think he took bribes, but uh, if it wasn't for that trial, they might have renamed the town for him. That's how influential he is down there.
Tell me a little bit about the downfall. Where did the cracks in the armor start to show relationship to the federal with Mayor Panici?
Right. So what happened was the feds came in to initially investigate Taco, and they got Taco, Albert Taco, and there was evidence of wrongdoing on LeBou's part, Nick LeBou. So Nick LeBou is one of the city councilmen, and the John Gliottoni was like a pretty good friend of Chuck's, and Louise Marshall he told me he took LeBou because it was he's Sicilian. He thought he could get like a good segment of the Chicago Heights population. I remember I looked at him and he just looks back at me and he goes, "I never said I was not a political animal." But so he didn't really know LeBou, and LeBou got into a couple of nickel and dime deals and some that are a little bit bigger where he was like coordinating bribes. So the feds were able to indict LeBou using RICO, Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. And what that does is sentence enhancement. So while he'd normally do, say, a year or 2 years for some of the stuff that he was doing, they were going to put him away for 30 years. So they indict him, and 3 days later, they got a deal between LeBou and the feds. And suddenly, all of the crimes that LeBou was accused of, LeBou is saying, well, yeah, no, I participated, but actually Chuck Panici was the one directing. And of course, that makes sense. He's the mayor. And they went with that. And after that, they got Ralph Galderio to claim that Chuck took, or I don't remember if he took a bribe from Ralph, that Ralph claimed it, or the other way around. And the mayor of South Chicago Heights, whose name slips my mind right now, he claimed there was like one deal where they were sort of involved with. But they didn't, besides people saying that Chuck was involved in a bribe, there was no evidence Chuck was involved in a bribe. And one of the bribes would be like gold. Everybody else's gold popped up. No one can seem to find what happened to Chuck's gold. They were like bonds. The bonds just disappeared. He claims that he gave Chuck bonds, but he doesn't remember what they were or what happened to them or what happened to anything. So the evidence is Nick LeBou says it happened and he was involved, so it must be true. Or Ralph Galderio says it happens. And Ralph, one important thing is Chuck and Ralph knew each other since they were like 9 years old. Ralph sold him out because he couldn't do however many years they were sticking him with, even though they were lifetime friends. And not only lifetime friends, basically without Chuck Panici, who knows what would have happened to Ralph Galderio? He got that guy jobs throughout his life. When Chuck owned the House of Charles, Ralph worked for him. When Chuck was mayor, Ralph had a job in the administration. And he repays him by saying that Chuck took bribes when he knew he didn't because he couldn't do the extra time himself.
What ends up happening to LeBou, to Gliottoni, to Marshall?
So LeBou moves over to I don't even remember, Albuquerque, New Mexico. He starts doing like marketing for some minor league team. And eventually a story is written about what happened to him, but I don't know how significant a factor that was. And I think he eventually died. John and Louise went back to Chicago Heights and they continued their lives. Everybody, it's sort of like your life after prison is going to be significantly worse than your life before prison. So, everybody continued. I'm not sure exactly what happened to Gliottoni, but Chuck told me Gliottoni was making even more money than Chuck was. That John was whatever, because mayor and the city council is part-time. You actually have a real job, but Gliottoni was making like $400,000 a year. So I don't know how significant the setback was, but presumably he already had a lot of money saved up anyway. But I think everybody just moved back, and I think everyone's passed away now.
What do you feel? Well, before we get into the last couple questions, Did you read, did Chuck Panici help you with your book? Did you ever read his book that he eventually wrote?
I didn't. I read part of his book. He and I, like I published. He not only helped me, but the whole purpose was that I was writing like his story. That he couldn't write it, so he needed someone to write it. But we got into an argument at the end, so I published it without his permission, if you will, except for the fact that right up until the end, I had his permission. He wanted to turn it into 3 books. He wanted to do something ridiculous, and it gets into like all kinds of psychodrama. But I read a little bit of his book afterwards, and I think actually he published. There's a second book that was published as well. I don't remember how much of each I read, but I know there's several books about it out there. The one thing I'll say is, regardless of our relationship, he was absolutely innocent. He was totally set up. He's one of the greatest mayors just in the history of America, and certainly in the history of Chicago Heights. He loved that town. Everything he did was in support of that town. There was a lot of corruption in his administration. You can find that in almost every town the size of Chicago Heights. There's a what's the guy's name? He was an Italian guy too, and he was a mayor of, I think, somewhere in like Rhode Island. And he said, like, if you spit, you're going to find somebody trying to take advantage of the system if they're working for a city government. It's really hard to stop all forms of corruption. But there was corruption, but that's like a legacy. You know, if you want to hold it against him legacy-wise. But he should not have done any time because he didn't participate in any bribes.
What do you feel like current residents can learn from the Chuck Panici story?
The feds, if the federal government wants you, they will get you, and they have a lot of powerful laws that they can manipulate, and RICO is just one of them. But they are this giant monolith that if you get in its way, it doesn't matter how powerful you are going to be taken down.
I know the one thing in his book, he talks about his legal counsel being less than standard.
Right. But that's kind of his fault, though. I told him this, but he chose that guy. He was given a referral. The guy he chose did some good stuff on some murder cases, some rapes. And so you're like, well, if the guy got somebody off on murder, he can certainly do my case. Well, murder is all states. So is rape. That guy never done a federal case before. Completely different. The evidence here is like exponentially more complex than the average murder case. Murder may be a more serious crime, but trying to unravel a bribery case is a lot more complicated. But Chuck picked him. But no, his lawyer was not that good. But the feds also set him up. There was a variety of factors. I also have a question about how the jury responded. There's one of the bribes. LeBou said, I don't recall, to 17 straight questions about details of the bribe. Now, if the main witness says, I don't recall, to 17 straight questions that refer to elements of the crime, how do you find the defendant guilty of said crime when there's no other evidence? How does that happen? So I have questions about the way the jury behaved. Yes, his defense counsel was almost criminally at times incompetent, but you know, the guy was probably in over his head, and I don't think Chuck understood that there's a huge difference between having a guy do a state case and having a guy do a federal case. And you know, but you only get one chance with that. And but the feds went after him. They had to know that LeBou was full of crap. They had to know it. This guy, he couldn't remember anything about anything when it really comes down to details. You know, he claimed that there was all these bribes that Chuck participated in, and not once did he give an exact date of anything that happened, which I found quite convenient because Chuck was such a busy guy that if you ever did, I bet Chuck could go back and say, that's interesting because I was in Houston that day. But that never happened, so Chuck couldn't go back. You know, he couldn't challenge that. He never once gave anything close to a specific. Oh, it happened in like '93. Oh, it happened in like '88. Like, it's never specific enough to be challenged, and no one seemed to find that suspicious. And the same thing with all of them. Nobody ever gave a date. Nothing specific enough that you could challenge it. And they had to know that they were setting him up. But look, Chris Gere, the prosecutor, I don't know if it's still on there, but when I called him, Chuck's prosecution is on his bio at the big law firm he works at in Chicago, where he probably makes 7 figures yearly.
Michael, what are 2 books you would recommend to the audience that have been influential to you as a person?
Okay, so my favorite author is Oscar Wilde, and the one that I think is most effective is De Profundis, which is a long letter that was eventually turned into a book that he wrote from jail to his gay lover. And it's just he gets into a variety of different things that's mind blowing in terms of philosophy in De Profundis, and also he's so clearly hurt at that point in his life. The writing becomes more powerful than during the phase of his life when everything's going great. But as far as what's helped my career, it's almost cliche, but All the President's Men, if you are trying to be a journalist, they don't just describe how they figured out, that's Woodward and Bernstein, how they figured out Watergate, but they basically explain like the mechanics of the journalism part of it. And it's in many ways very much a how-to guide on how to approach an investigation of that sort.
Michael, where can the audience find you on the internet?
Well, I'm a freelance journalist, so it's a little difficult, but I have a blog that like catalogs all of my stuff, which is The Provocateur at blogspot.com, or I'm on Facebook, on Twitter at Mike Volpe, and then Prosecutors Gone Wild is one of 4 books. That's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or if you hate all of those, whatever one you really like.
Michael, thanks for coming on my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, 5th Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.